No ghosting. We've been doing this a long time. You can't
Yep.
build good networks by ghosting people. So
Yep. All right. So I think we're gonna get started here. We can already are, but we got 79% said that they are currently interviewing. So there are the results. So as we've been a little chit-chatting here as we get started, my name is Mark Sapoznikov. I'm here with Impact Business Group. I'm the marketing manager. So I'm not going to be presenting. I'm just going to help kind of facilitate a little bit and do some introductions. But the main stars are Kurt Wilbrandt. He's one of our senior recruiters and account managers here at Impact. And I'll let him do a quick introduction. And then we got Michelle Kupchan, who's the marketing director at Monster. So I'll let you both just do a brief introduction of yourself.
sure. I'm a former software developer who ironically was recruited to become a tech recruiter many years ago and have found it a good fit for my background. And I'm happy to be here at Impact because Impact was actually founded by some of my first bosses when I got into tech staffing. Our model here is to hire folks who know the industry that they're going to be doing talent acquisition in, and we cross-train folks that are technical in all the necessary methods that are used in talent acquisition and legal and compliant interviewing. So we're a little different than most of the staffing companies out there. Most of our recruiters and account managers are former technical.
And Michelle, let us know who you are.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm me.
Mhm.
I'm the director of marketing for Monster North America, as Mark mentioned. I've been around longer than Monster has, which is pretty impressive given that were founded in 1994. What you may not know is that we were the very, very first job board, and as well as being one of the very first businesses on the World Wide Web, as my 86-year-old mother would say. And we've been connecting job seekers with opportunities and employers with the right talent as we continue to do so. We have tons of resources for job seekers as well as employers, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. But things like whether you're searching for a job or refining your resume or planning your next career move, looking for help. Some of those questions that you guys have put in here ahead of time, we can find blogs and resources, just as Mark mentioned, with Impact on our website as well as on our mobile app. And similar for employers, we really want to help employers not ghost candidates and really help candidates understand what the job descriptions are, and so forth, so that again both sides can be matched well.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, we'll do just a little bit about us. We're going to get through the interview process and what that looks like, what you can do for pre-interview preparation, how you can present your best self. We'll get into salary a little bit, so that's always a hot topic, how to negotiate your salary.
Mhm.
And then things you can do once the interview is over, some post-interview follow-up, and then towards the end we'll do some Q&A. So we got lots of questions asked during the sign-up process, so we're going to pick some of the most common questions that we received. And then what we'll do afterwards is we'll take all the questions and put them all in a PDF and respond to them all and send those out. So if we didn't get to your question specifically, we're going to try to get to everybody, but if we didn't, we'll have something afterwards to send out with all the responses. And then we'll have some tools and resources to share at the end. So you'll want to see that. And we already did a little bit about us, so I don't know if Kurt or Michelle, if you wanted to add anything else before we dive right into it.
I won't bore them.
No.
Okay, excellent. So this is the lineup for the sort of a typical interview process. So Michelle, maybe you want to lead us off
Sure.
and just
Yeah.
let everybody know what they could expect from interviewing.
Perfect. First, I want to preface this by saying when Kurt, Mark, and I were talking about this workshop and talking about the interview process, I just want to be clear that this is a very general overview. We tried to put in kind of everything that may happen, but when you work with a staffing firm or someone as expert as Kurt in Impact, you know, some of these steps will be either skipped or prepped ahead of time, and the experts will take care of it. So just know that these are kind of the overview, and we'll get into some help with all of these parts. I won't necessarily read the entire thing. You guys can read that here. I would say that the preparation piece is probably the most important, as well as the first interview and the final interview. Obviously, the final interview we'll talk about again in a little bit, but it gives you an opportunity to sort of reiterate, ask questions, and so forth. But we're going to talk about the preparation first because that is really key to being able to move forward in the interview process.
Yep, I'll just take a question here from Ty. He's asking if this will be recorded, and yes, we are recording this webinar. So if you can't watch the whole thing, we'll send out a link to the recording afterwards. It'll be available. So if you miss anything, don't worry. And Kurt, did you want to add anything else on the interview process?
No, I think Michelle covered it. This is a typical interview cycle, but it will vary by employer and it'll vary by the type of interview, whether it's in person versus a video interview or just a phone interview. And it will vary by the audience. Typically, you're going to talk to a corporate recruiter or someone in HR first. Then you'll get moved on to talking to maybe the technical manager, then the technical manager and their team. But that will vary by employer. And so if you're working with Impact Business Group or other agencies, they should be able to help you understand what is this particular employer's interview cycle so that you know the steps that you're going to walk through. And our main focus is more on preparing for the interview for this seminar so that you can get moved through the process and beat out your competition.
All right. So Michelle, you mentioned a little bit about pre-interview preparations. You want to maybe dive into that a little bit more?
I'm going to actually let Kurt take that so people don't have to
let
hear
Kurt
me the
share.
entire time, but we'll swap
right.
off.
Yep, no problem. Basically, when you're working with an agency, especially with Impact, you'll never do an interview with one of our clients until someone on our team has actually helped you get ready for the interview. And a standard part of that process is one, to have you review the job posting or the job requirements, because you may be applying to multiple roles, and by the time you get an interview, it's easy to confuse which position am I actually interviewing for. So usually the day before your interview, we want to review, here is the specific role you're interviewing for, so that when you give your answers to that employer, everything lines up. We also help you with doing some research on the company. We give you some resources to help you be more familiar with what is this employer doing, what industry are they in. We do recommend you kind of research maybe from their blogs or other materials on the web, who are some of their major competitors. That will impress an employer that you've done your homework. You know, it's kind of the stereotypical question of why do you want to work here? And you do need to have an answer for that if you are asked about that. And the best thing you can do is just do some homework ahead of time on what the company is, what they do, who they compete with, and then keep your answer fairly generic after that. But it gives proof that you're engaged and that this is something that's important to you. You do want to have some questions that you ask the employer as well. You'll invariably hit that stage where they'll say, hey, this has gone pretty well. Do you have any questions for us? Most folks are so glad to be done with the pressure of the interview. They're like, oh no, I'm good. I like everything I've heard. But actually to make an impression on the employer, you want to have some questions prepared. And usually for first round interviews, the safest questions are scope related. You know, how big is the company? How big is the department I'd be working in? How big is the team that I'm on? And one of my favorite questions that I really press folks to ask is, you know, if I were hired, you know, how do you onboard a new person? You know, how do you onboard a new team member? And the reason that question is important is it shifts the employer's focus from screening you out of the role to being inclusive and actually in their mind's eye thinking through, here's the steps I'd need you to go through to actually join our team. And we do want the employer moving from that filtering mode to an inclusion mode in terms of how they're viewing the interview. So you do want to have some good questions prepared. We'll help you with that for any of the interviews that we send you on. If at all possible, if you know who's on the interview team, go look up their LinkedIn profile, do some social media searching as well, stalking, if you will. Just get to know your audience of who you'd be talking to. If someone's really technical in your discipline, that would give you a common thread, even if you don't know them yet, to understand what would be important to them. And also think ahead of time to what your strengths are, as related to the job that you applied to, because you're probably going to get that question. So I tell everybody, if you want to win the interview, you've got to prepare ahead of time. It's just like taking a test in college. If you want to ace the test, you do study well before you sit down to take the test. And interviewing is very similar to that.
Yeah, so we got a few questions that came in. What is an impactful question? I think you already answered that one pretty well. And then somebody's asking, how do they know who they'll be interviewing with ahead of time?
Well,
So,
I
yeah,
would
Kurt, you
ask
want to
if
take
you're
it?
talking to HR or talking to the recruiter that maybe went through your resume with you and then they scheduled you an interview, that is a very fair question to ask. In working with an agency, we always ask for that. We want to know who you're meeting, and that way we can help you get better prepared for that. But on your own, it is fair to ask the recruiter if they say, hey, I'd like to have you talk to the manager or to the team, to actually ask them, who is that and who will I be talking to? I just like to be able to recognize, face with a name. But the beauty is it lets you research the people on the interview team. You won't always get it, but you should always ask for it. It's not an unreasonable request.
Yep. And then we got a couple of comments on, I think what a good question would be is describe a typical workday and what would you have me doing in the first 30 to 60 days? So I don't know if you,
Perfect.
those are
Yeah.
good questions. Yep, those are good
Yeah.
questions.
That gets the employer thinking about you as a team member as opposed to just a candidate. So those are
Yep.
good
And then
questions.
we got a comment, why is the position open? Would be a good question as well. Somebody, Jim suggested.
Yep, it's a fair
Uh,
question. And typically, there's not a lot we can do with that, but it is a fair question. Are they expanding the team? That's a good sign. Did someone resign and move on to another role, or was someone promoted, or was someone let go because of performance? So
yep,
it's good to know, but I'm not sure we can do a lot with that particular question.
yep. And then I've got a question on a desire to make and this would be up your alley, Kurt, make a transition from one technical position type to another technical position type. So I'm assuming maybe like a network administrator to a programmer or something like that. So one technical type of role to another. And this person says they've been unsuccessful so far. What are some advice you can give?
Yeah, the biggest challenge with that, it's like a pivot, right? Career pivot, whether you move completely out of your discipline or you move completely out of a specific technical role that you have a lot of expertise in. Um, the salary follows skills. And so if you're going to make a pivot, you do have to be prepared that you may have to take a step back in compensation to do so. But what you want to demonstrate in your resume and in your conversation is what have you done to actually prepare yourself for that new role? How have you leveraged your existing experience into this new discipline? What prompted you to do it? And what have you been doing to get ready for it? If you've taken a boot camp, you've gone back to school, you want that documented in your resume, and you want to discuss that during the interview as well. That this isn't just an last minute idea I've had. I've actually been preparing myself for it. Key thing is you want to show how your past experience has some relevance, and then what foundational skills have you built to do the new role.
Yep. And we're getting several questions on strength and weaknesses, and I think we have that on our Q&A slide, so that'll
We
be
do.
coming up a little later. Yeah, so if you have any questions on strength and weaknesses type of questions, we'll be getting to that a little bit later in the presentation. So Michelle, how do you present your best self?
Obviously, a great question. I think it follows nicely and ties in with what Kurt was talking about preparation and making sure you do your homework. There's lots of ways to present yourself best during an interview, and there's a few key habits that you can see here that make a difference, right? I mean, the very first kind of basic thing is show up on time. There's an expression, if you show up on time, you're late. I always like to go just a few minutes early so I can figure out where I'm going just in case I head to the wrong office, or log in ahead of time if you're doing a virtual interview. Sometimes there's technical difficulties. So show up on time. Whether you're in person or online, dress appropriately. You want to make a strong first impression. Better to sort of overdress, meaning, if it's business casual in the office and you know that, it's okay. Put a suit coat on, put something that makes you look very professional. It's always respectful. Confidence is key. We don't always have that necessarily, but we just fake it, right? Fake it until you make it. We practice ahead of time. Again, going along with what Kurt was talking about, preparing. I mean, as simple as look in the mirror and do it over and over again, as uncomfortable as that is, it helps you, be uncomfortable in front of the mirror rather than uncomfortable online or in person. A firm handshake if it's in person again, great eye contact, no matter if it's online or in person, that's key. Try to avoid being nervous, like fidgeting and saying and all of those things that we do when we're anxious or trying to fill in the blanks. It's better to be kind of listening and pulled back and just really calming yourself as best you can. And again, this goes along with what we talked about preparation. Practice this. Practice if you've never done meditation or breathing, use all of the tools that are out there to help you go into the interview as your best self and is feeling confident. And like Kurt said, doing your homework ahead of time, it does bring confidence. You're not as worried about not knowing what you're doing. Um, I already had mentioned, I just said, so that's kind of funny. Avoid saying things like, and like, when you're discussing your experience, this is getting into more of the nitty gritty. Back up your experience with achievements. Don't just say, I'm really good at communicating. Give an example of how that worked in your favor, how that benefited your employer or your team. Try to use quantitative results if you can. I am a team player and I helped the engagement build by 20% or, something of that nature. I know that can be a little more difficult. So just try to back up what you're saying with real achievements and examples. Remember, also, this happens all the time. No one's expecting you to go in and have every single skill set that they're looking for. Typically, and Kurt, you can back me up on this, employers are putting their wish list together, right? If we had to have everything we possibly have, we want A to Z and then some. So don't be nervous if you don't have a skill that is on that list or that someone asks you about. Don't shy away from it. Emphasize your eagerness to learn and grow, and maybe something in your life, whether it's professional or not, shows that you have or your ability to have that skill. But again, don't shy away from it. Prepare ahead of time, as Kurt mentioned, so that you have an answer to that question so you're not stumped. And just remind yourself it's okay that you don't need to have every single skill set. Again, this ties in with that question. If you're unsure about a question, don't hesitate to ask for clarification. You're having a human conversation with someone. Hopefully you have a recruiter that's empathetic and understands that. 9 times out of 10, I would say you would ask the question, just so I'm sure I'm answering this correct, the way you need to, or give you the right information. Did you mean XYZ? You could reiterate the question if you don't want to say, what did you mean by that? Just be sure that you have clarification, and it shows that you're engaged and thoughtful. And I would add one more thing to this is that, again, showing engaged and thoughtful, listen, don't try to think of what your answer is while the recruiter is speaking. Really try to pull back and listen to what the person is saying. You might find that they say a word that ticks in your head that you then can reiterate when you're answering your question. So it's really important. I think that's a life skill in general, actually, when you're communicating with family members, coworkers, whatever, whomever. Try not to think ahead in your head. Well, how am I going to answer this? Oh my goodness, I need to make sure I have everything right. Just take some time to listen, engage in the conversation, slow yourself down, and you'll walk away doing the best you can. And that's all you can ask of yourself. Just do the best you can, present your best self.
Yep. So we got a question that ties in a little bit to if you have a skill that you don't have. Angela is wondering, what do I do when people find out as an educator I have no skills? So first of all, if you're an educator, you have lots of skills that a lot of employers are going to really like. So definitely don't sell yourself short. But maybe Kurt, can you respond to, if somebody doesn't have the skills that the employer is asking for, what do they do?
Right. Well, the key thing is you want to understand equivalencies, right? So you may have a skill that's very similar or equivalent to a skill that's listed in the job posting, like strong communication skills. I would hope that someone who's a teacher or an educator has that. So you just, before you go to the interview, think of those equivalencies of where have my life experiences, my work experiences given me things that are similar to what's listed in the job description. We do actively counsel our clients too, that when they put together their job posting and they have that laundry list of skills and experiences they want, that typically the only person that'll actually have those already works for them because that's where they got them. And so we even counsel employers, you need to understand equivalencies, and when you put your postings together, realize that the exact match of everything you do doesn't exist in the marketplace except at your own firm. So be more mindful of what are equivalent skills that would help someone come up to speed quickly. Truth is, when you take a new job, no matter where you go, you still have to learn the environment. You have to learn the tech stack that they're using. You have to learn the nuances of their company and their culture. So it's a given that there's a lot of things you're going to have to learn regardless, so you don't have to be the perfect match. And in terms of those anxiety issues and impacting an interview, part of the coaching I give folks is, you know what, you don't have the job today. You've applied, maybe got a pre-screen, so you've made it a certain way through the interview cycle, but you don't have the job today. So the worst thing that can happen to you after the interview is you just don't have the job afterwards. So it's not the end of the world if you don't ace the interview, or there's things you find during the interview that make it apparent either you or the employer are not the right fit for each other. So as you go into it, take a lot of deep breaths and realize I really have nothing to lose and everything to gain by having this exercise. And instead of saying and like, which is a stall tactic to try and think through your answer, it's okay to tell the interviewer, hey, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought of that before. Give me a second to kind of think through that. It's okay to ask for time to be able to come up with a valid answer to a question you weren't expecting. And that just shows when you're on the job, you will do the same thing. I'm not going to just jump into something blindly. I'm going to ask the right questions so I can produce good results for the employer. So treat it as a working conversation. And if you're really nervous, tell the interviewer you're nervous.
Yeah, that's very
Most,
good.
yeah, most people are compassionate. They understand, and it's their job, since they're hosting you, you're visiting their house. It's the host's job to make you feel comfortable. So,
Exactly.
don't sit there sweating bullets, and tell them that you're a little, overwhelmed, you're a little bit nervous, you're not a professional interviewer, and let them help you get through the interview cycle.
All right,
That's all
good.
such great advice. Just one little quick step on
Sure.
that. When we talk about the missing skills, I would add that many employers, and the smart ones really, they want someone who can grow into the position too, right? You don't want to necessarily have someone that checks all the boxes, because that person might get bored in 6 months. So just as Kurt said, just it's okay. Just be mindful that it's okay.
Yep. So we got a few more questions that came in here, so I try to answer them real quick before we go to the next slide. So we got a question: if our staffing company already has a contract for the job, or if we're competing with multiple sourcing companies, depending on the candidate to close the sale. So yes, if you see a job posted on our website, we already have a signed agreement with that company that we are going to help them find a candidate for that job. So it's a live job and we are hiring. But yes, we are also competing with other staffing agencies. So the client may have contacted multiple sources, and there may be others that are hiring for the same job as well. So it's a little bit of yes on both questions. But definitely, if you see a job on our site, we are hiring. And then Jim suggests bring a portfolio and take notes. That's a good suggestion. And let's see.
Key thing, safety point with that though, is when folks get nervous in an interview, they may start leaning on their portfolio, as in taking excessive notes. It's an anxiety abatement technique, but it disengages you from being active with people you're talking to. So use it when you need to, because there may be things you need to follow up on, so that shows you're prepared. But be mindful that you're not constantly taking notes as a way to reduce your anxiety, because then you're disconnecting from what should be a very interactive process.
Yep. I've got a couple more comments of that. Rose says it's not a date, or it's a date, it's not a marriage. And Robert says it's a conversation, not an interrogation. So those are good suggestions.
Yes, I agree with all those.
Yeah. So on that note, Kurt, I know you are passionate about salary. So do you want to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about how to navigate salary in an interview?
Yeah, there's two sides to it. There's the employer side and the candidate side. So one thing we do up front is we do counsel with our clients to make certain that they are willing to move forward and hire somebody with a fair and market competitive offer. So we push with that so we understand what their boundaries are, what their budget is up front. When we work with candidates, then we let you know that the employer who has engaged us, this is the budget they have for this role. And so you would know that going into the interview, and we would give you some coaching on how to address if it comes up. But if you're doing something on your own, the suggestions here are, hey, review the job posting. More and more states are requiring salary ranges to be posted. If they're not ridiculous, like $50,000 to $250,000, then that would give you some guidance as to what level of experience the employer is looking for. There's something called internal equity in all organizations. It's the staff that's already working there, doing the work you probably would be engaged to do, and at various levels. So the employer does actually know, for someone with 3 years experience doing this function, here's what we typically pay. And they do that at all levels. So the key thing is when you're hiring someone new, you do want to try to stay within your internal equity. You want to hire people at a fair wage for the work that they're doing at the level of experience they have. So the employers do know this. You also have to understand you need to fit within whatever their internal equity is in terms of compensation. So if you want $100,000 more than everybody else doing the same job, you're not going to get hired for that role. But you need to be mindful of, on you as an individual, I need to be competitive as well. There's a lot of folks looking. So it's college level economics. Supply is exceeding demand right now. And so wages typically come in lower when that happens. And the reverse will happen when everybody's growing, demand is way up, and supply is low. But know your market, your local market, and then adjust your expectations, to be competitive. Generally, I don't like salary discussions happening during the interview cycle. It's an easy check mark item for a lot of HR recruiters. Oh, he needs too much money. She needs too much money. Oh, this person isn't earning enough, so maybe they don't have the skills. When we're engaged, we already know the range that's allowed. And what I like to promote up front when we send your resume to a client is here's a range that you're open to considering. Agencies are tasked to make sure that we don't send you on an interview where the employer can't afford to hire you. That's a waste of your time and it's a waste of their time. And so we take great strides to make sure there's alignment there, that their range overlaps with your range to some degree. My preference is let's present it up front, but let's not talk about it till we get through the actual interview process of making a connection with the employer, showing where there's alignment between your experiences and your skills, where you bring value. I'd rather we talk about the salary itself at the end, because knowing up front you can both afford to work together. Now let's figure out the important part. Do you want to work together, and will this be a good working relationship for you and the employer? Because the truth is, once you guys get to know each other and you both decide this is a good fit, that is the best time, because you're both now motivated to make it work. That's the best time to then fine tune whatever the final salary is going to be. You throw out a number because you're really excited that's low, you're going to leave money on the table. That's not good.
Hey,
If
Kurt,
you,
can I throw in a question that came in?
yeah, you can.
Sure. So if the question is, if I overshoot the salary range, will they ever come back and say, we can't do that, but how about this amount instead?
That will vary by employer, but if you think of it from the employer's perspective, if you way overshoot their upper end of their range, they either have to take a level 2 and make it a level 3 to be able to hire you, but they're going to view it as a risk factor. You might take the role because you need to pay your bills and it's the only thing available. But in the back of their mind, they're going to be thinking this person will take it short term. They're going to keep looking for that salary they really want, and they're a risk factor, a turnover risk. So I personally prefer that we use ranges to keep things open-ended, to give you both wiggle room as you go through the interview cycle, as opposed to overshooting the mark and then having them rule you out completely. But it's all risk management. So the more homework you do up front, the more you understand up front, the better. But sometimes you can't fix it once they hear a number that's too high.
Yeah. And then another question that came in, Gretchen says, it's not legal to ask your current salary in many states. But if a recruiter asks, what is the proper way to answer that? So Kurt, you would
Yeah,
get that question a
here's
lot, I think.
here's the thing. If it is illegal, they shouldn't do it, but it's probably ignorance on their part about that might be some newer legislation. It's a normal human curiosity point to say, where are you at today? Because they're trying to figure out if you fit within this new role. So if you're asked that, I would just give them a range. I'd say, well, total comp wise, I'm in this zone. Total comp can be your base salary, any bonuses, your benefits. I would still try to give a range. If you start quoting laws to a potential employer, they may think you've got a lawyer sitting in the room with you as well. And that's not working to your goal, which is I need a job, I want a good job or a better job. So I would just give them a range again of saying, total comp wise, I'm in this kind of zone. I'm flexible for a good opportunity. And if they keep pressing, you don't want to be combative because, again, we want this person to like us and move us along in the process. But I would then turn the tables on them. I'd say, well, what range do you guys have open, for this particular role? What's the internal range then? I would turn it around before just giving them, a set number.
And I have another, are you still going through the salary topics, or do you want to take a different question?
No, I think we've hit enough of those, and this will be on the materials we have on the website. But salary is one where if we can push it to the end, that's what I prefer because we need to make sure everybody wants to work together. And then when everybody's motivated to make it happen, that part of the process becomes much easier.
Yep. So I have another question that's not related to salary, but Michelle or Kurt, you can take it. So Angela is asking, I feel like a professional interviewer. I've had many that have gone well, but I still have no job. It's been going close to a year. How can I change that? So I think maybe that would warrant maybe a more in-depth conversation to the side, but maybe you can give a more general answer if that's the situation.
Yeah, the challenge being is half of the decision to take a job and half of the decision to be offered the job comes from the interpersonal side, the chemistry piece. And so the best thing you can do is kind of replay in your own head, how have I approached these? I may have come across very professional, but when you're interviewing a lot back to back to back, your subconscious gets bored with that. And telling your own story, which should be your favorite story, starts losing energy in terms of how you're presenting yourself. So key thing is try to keep it fresh every time. But analyze how have I been connecting with the people that I've been interviewing with, and is there anything, reading body language, reading facial expressions, that maybe it's not coming across as well as I had hoped. Sometimes we think we're given, an Academy Award performance and then find out that they were not impressed and they were polite. Avoid gimmicky things and avoid dominating the conversation as well. Would be my general advice without knowing more about what those interviews were and the personalities involved. But that's doing the homework again on who am I meeting can help you adjust as well ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think
Sorry,
probably
go
both
ahead.
agree that one of the things that a lot of people don't do after an interview is actually follow up with the employer. So Michelle, do you want to maybe share some insight? Maybe that could be a difference maker too with if you get the job or
Absolutely.
not. So
Sure.
I would first, just along the lines of what Kurt was saying, don't be afraid to follow up and ask, especially if it's the recruiter. And I know that when you work with Impact, they will help you with this process, but ask why, ask why, what could I have done differently? What type of person or what type of role did you hire? What did that person have that I didn't? Going back to the actual interview, asking who does your ideal candidate look like, and how you can then speak to it during that conversation. Another thing that I've done in the past personally is really just gone back and looked at my resume, looked at the job descriptions, looked at what I, in retrospect could have said differently or brought to the table differently. I've asked colleagues, I've asked, I've even talked to, a professional such as Kurt, you know, let's take a look at my story. Let's take a look at my resume again. Help me freshen this up. Help me tell a better story or a different story. Because again, just along the lines of what Kurt said, when you tell the same story over and over again, you can lose your energy. You might miss something. You might walk in looking defeated, not even realizing that you're doing that. So, try to take a fresh approach and also be kind to yourself. It's just, it's tough. It's just you're competing with other people. You don't know what the internal schematics are, if they had an internal candidate or something changed in the job. So try to keep your chin up, so to speak, and just try to keep moving forward. When the fit happens, it will happen. And just try to do the best you can, as we had said earlier.
Yep. And we got a few more questions. Let's see. So a few questions on the tell me about yourself question. So I think we have that on our Q&A slide. So we'll get to that in just a minute.
Yeah.
And then somebody's asking, I've had 2 exceptional interviews lately, great interaction and chemistry with the interviewer, and in both cases I was ruled out after those calls. What happened, do you think? And I think, Michelle, that goes to what you're saying, like you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. They might have had an internal candidate and they just put the posting out because they had to, or something else was going on. But do you have any other thoughts on that?
I would just like I said earlier, it's okay to ask the question. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for getting back to me with what, with your decision. May I ask what, why? May I ask what I could have done differently, or was there something that stood out that I didn't address? Just that question. I mean, they may or may not answer you, but if they did take the time to reach out and give you a decision, I know lots of us, or lots of you said, you'd been ghosted, but if the recruiter takes enough time to do that, I would ask the question. And then maybe something a little stalking that I do on the side too is after the fact, you can go on LinkedIn and see, I'm starting a new job and here's my job. I do try to look at maybe if I can find out who did get the job and why. I try to look at their background a little and try to be very honest with myself about what the differences could have been. But again, if you're working with Impact or a firm or an expert like Kurt, I think, and correct me, Kurt, I'll let you jump in here. Those are the sort of things that you can find out too after the fact. So I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, we always ask for one, when a candidate has an interview, we will not contact the employer until we've heard back from the candidate. We want to know, what did you like? What didn't you like? Was there anything that maybe you misinterpreted, that you heard there? If you tell me some feedback that makes no sense to me based on the long relationship we've had with that employer, I'm going to ask you to hold before making any final decisions. I'm going to get with the employer and find out how you got that impression. And I do that for them as well. If they give me some feedback that makes no sense based on us talking about the role up front and then helping you get ready for the interview, and then they come back with something off base, I'm going to ask our client to hold and let me qualify that with you. It's very easy for both sides of the table to get the wrong impression during an interview. Relationships take a long time to build, yet we're trying to build one in an hour, if you will. So there's just a lot of pressure on the interview process itself. So what we want to do is clarify, and then if need be, get you both back on the phone to clear the air and then keep things moving forward. But the other thing too is we live in a hyper competitive world right now. So you could have the greatest chemistry with the people that you're interviewing with, but someone else may have also had great chemistry with them, and it may have come down to something that there's nothing you can change, whether it's an experience you didn't have that the other person did. There's many factors that lead to an employer offering the role to someone else. So like Michelle said, you just got to do your best. And if you think of something after the fact, because it happens all the time, if somebody blanks because they're a little nervous in the interview, and as soon as they get in their car or they hang up, from the video interview, the answer pops right in their head, then you should follow up with the employer right away after that to say, hey, you kind of stumped me on that question. I was a little nervous, but as soon as we got off the phone, here's the answer I wished I would have given you. If you do that in a timely manner, many times you can preempt what they're thinking is a question mark from turning into a rejection reason.
I
So,
think as we were talking about interview follow-up, that's a perfect time in the follow-up email to include a note about something that you thought maybe they misunderstood or maybe you forgot to
right.
mention.
One question you can ask at the very end, and it can be insightful. You may not get anything, but it can be insightful. Is just say, hey, I really enjoyed this time we've been talking. I'm definitely very interested in this role. I would just like to ask you before we go, is there anything I have said, or is there anything you were hoping to hear that I didn't say that would be a reason why you don't move me to the next step in your interview cycle? Because if there is, I'd just like an opportunity to address it while we're still here talking about the role while everything is fresh. Now, if your gut's telling you this is really going great and everything seems to be lining up, you may not need to ask that. But if you're worried for any reason, that's a great question. It shows courage because you're saying, did I mess something up? And it also gives you a chance to respond because maybe the interview, like any conversation, went down a few bunny trails and you just didn't loop back to one of the main questions that was asked. And so asking that question, is there anything I did say or things you were hoping to hear that I didn't say, still gives you a chance to fill in the gaps and address it right while it's fresh. So use that if you need it.
Yep. All right, Kurt, so we got a question from Jim. He said he talked to you on LinkedIn about the job market and that it's starting to improve. And he's wondering if you can just briefly
All right.
elaborate on that.
Yeah, since I focus heavily in the tech space, it has been brutal for probably the last 18 months. I mean, everything rocketed after COVID because everybody felt they had a year or two of pent-up demand, but then it plateaued quickly. And then as we all have seen, there's been lots of layoffs and other things slowing things down. I would have to say in the last probably 2 months, we've seen a solid uptick in requirements in like the infrastructure space, help desk, network support, application development. So I would not say it's, you know, climbing aggressively, but it is improving. And some of the trade organizations we participate with have given us some national pictures of statistics they map and track, and they have said that they're guardedly optimistic that they're seeing the right trends now, that the demand line is starting to move north instead of diving south. And so far we're seeing, I would call it conservative but steady improvements month over month. So we're hoping throughout the rest of the year. This being an election year, it makes it hard because businesses get very nervous about changes in who's in the White House and things that may come. So sometimes they hold back until we get in the first quarter of the next year. But so far, I'm guardedly optimistic. I've been busier in the last few months than probably the last 18 months. So depending on your specialization, that'll determine when you see more activity.
Yeah, Michelle, have you seen anything job posting side for Monster on that?
Yeah, I would say, we track with the Bureau of Labor Statistics as well, and I think some of those numbers are a little bit more optimistic than, or a little bit more aggressive, as Kurt said, than we're seeing at Monster. But again, it does really depend on the role, right? I mean, the medical field, nurses, there's still a lack there. And then we have some other roles that are still sort of slow and steady. But again, like I'm in marketing. Marketing has very huge competitive landscape, and so there may be job openings, but there's 300, 400 people applying for the job. So I think you are going to start seeing some more openings. I think, as Kurt said, I think it'll be more Q1 25. But yeah, I'm optimistic, and I think we are seeing slow and steady hiring and more openings.
Yeah, Kurt, so I got a question, maybe got a good one on this. So somebody's asking, so on their professional resume, they have an MBA, and let's see, uh, they're wondering if they should remove it for a better chance to finding a job. It said my interviews go great, and I feel like my background is strong. I'm not sure what my next step should be. Should I remove my master's?
That is a tough one. I mean, it is a credential and it shows skills in and background in an industry. But sometimes it can be viewed as this person is going to expect more compensation because of it. So I would look at the requirements of the posting. We have several clients like in the medical device and high-tech industries where they'll list bachelor's required, master's preferred. So in that environment, you have an advantage if you have a master's and someone doesn't. But I would look at the job posting itself and then make a judgment call from there in terms of what are they really requiring in terms of credentialing. And if they're only looking for an associate's degree, maybe we leave the MBA off for the sake of getting them to engage. But for other firms, that's going to be viewed as an advantage. So it kind of comes back to doing that homework about the posting itself. The other big thing you want to do too is regardless of a posting, check your own network of contacts and see if you know anybody who's working at that firm, because then you can get the true inside scoop on what are they filtering on. So if you have somebody from college who works there that's a friend, ask them, what does it take? What are they really looking for beyond what you see in the web postings? Some of those web postings come from like HRIS systems. A lot of them are templated. It's the bane of my existence because many times they're so generic it's hard to tell what the employer's looking for. So doing some research as best you can, like through your personal network, will also help you hedge your bets on what to put in your resume.
I think that's such great advice too, especially going back to the preparation. Many times you apply for a job, months before, and then all of a sudden you hear, go back and prepare right before the interview. Make sure you're checking the boxes on those job descriptions, along the lines of what Kurt just said about looking at your network for whom may work there or have worked there in the past. I also recommend, going through your network and seeing if anyone has a connection with anybody that works at those organizations. I know many times we have a lot of connections on LinkedIn that we may not actually personally know, very well. But if they're connected to me, I will absolutely connect one of my colleagues or friends with that person, no matter what. I reach out to the person ahead of time and say, hey, I have this, colleague or someone I recommend for a role that your company has open. May I connect you? Those sort of things. Any advantage that you can have. And going back to the MBA, again, exactly what Kurt said. Let's look at the job description, try to find out even who's in the role now and check that person's background. It can make a difference either way.
Yeah, and then we got a question, are you seeing more and more hybrid? That seems to be the norm here in the DC area. So I personally, from what I'm seeing on our postings, it's been pretty steady the last few years. And also a lot of companies may post a job as just a regular on-site, but they may still have a lot of flexibility for hybrid, even if they're not advertising it specifically. But I don't know, Michelle, are you seeing any change as far as hybrid postings?
Yeah, it's funny because this year it was the first time we started hearing about and having customers who are requiring people to get back to work. And then there was a lot of pushback from candidates. We do a future of work survey and we do candidate polls constantly. There was real pushback from candidates to say, like we need the flexibility, we need, and so forth. So I think you're right. Coming back to more of a hybrid rather than fully remote role is definitely happening more and more. I think it gives, on both sides, it gives an opportunity to benefit both sides because, again, you can be in the office, have sort of FaceTime with people, get to know people on a different level, but still offers the flexibility of working from home and the advantages of that. So yeah, the shorter answer to that question is yes, I do see hybrid more and more, but if you scratch a little deeper, there's a lot more to it than that. But yeah, hybrid's definitely becoming kind of the norm versus fully remote or fully on site.
And before we jump into the last slide, we've got about 10 minutes left. Kurt, I think you'll be good on this one here. Because I hear you talk about job hopping a lot, the people that have that type of situation. So saying let's see, I feel like this having varied work experiences may be killing my chances of getting hired. I seem to look like a job hopper. What can I do to change that?
Well, the key thing is to be hyper accurate in why did you make those say short-term job changes. The typical stint in the tech world is about 2 to 3 years at an employer before someone jumps to either get access to other tech or just to improve their compensation level. But if you ask most candidates when you just meet them in general, everyone says, hey, I want a place to call home. I want something stable. I want to have a career. I want to have growth path. So if you've had circumstances leading to shorter term stints, there's a couple things you can do with your resume. If you've been doing a bunch of independent contracting, there are ways you can redesign your resume to list like the full duration you've been contracting, and then within that list the individual engagements you've had. So visually, it looks like you've had a bunch of projects under the independent contracting sort of banner. In terms of permanent roles where you've moved, you want to be crystal clear on the reasons for change. And sometimes I'll recommend to folks annotate that in your resume. You have the dates of employment, who you worked for, and in parentheses you say staff reduction, layoff. You list what was the cause right in your resume, because if they review that and then they call you anyways, you shouldn't have to talk a lot about that. And I do tell everyone, don't apologize for things like layoffs and companies going out of business, things you had absolutely no control over. Don't be apologetic, just state it as a fact and don't be emotional about it. Usually if you have to discuss anything negative in an interview, what you want to do is be very factual versus emotional and keep it very, very net, because the focus of the interview is to build positive momentum with the employer, not to belabor things that are negative or harsh that you've been going through. Those don't add value to your goal, which is I want an offer. I want a good place to work. But if you annotate it right in the resume, sometimes that removes it anyways. But you want to have more content in the resume about what you learned there than the reason why you left.
All right, so
I
we
would,
got about,
oh,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead,
I
Michelle.
just wanted to add two things there. I think one is that we're noticing the longevity of people being in roles. People are job hopping a little more, and I do think that has to do with corporate layoffs and all of these other factors. I also agree with Kurt. If you've already made it to the interview process, you don't have to go too deep into it. The question will probably arise. One answer, and I think that Kurt said this earlier about asking a question about culture and so forth. It's a little tricky on how you'd answer. And again, this would take preparation ahead of time. But you can talk about, the culture. I see that XYZ company, meaning the company you're interviewing for, has really great opportunities for advancement or a diverse population, and diversity's highlighted and whatever it is. And just say, it didn't really align at the last company. They were great people, but I saw that this wasn't an area for growth or whatever the question is. Again, that can be tricky to answer, and someone like Kurt partnering with you could help guide you on that, just to be prepared. But I would be as matter of fact, non-emotional, non-negative as possible, as Kurt mentioned. So
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so we got about 7 minutes here until the top of the hour. So try to cover all of our topics before then. And then I think we could probably stay on for a few minutes after that if people want to hang out and we can take a few more questions. But maybe I know one of the most common questions that we get is how do you tell me about yourself? How do you do that? So either Kurt or Michelle, if you want to jump right into it.
Sure. Well, that's a loaded question. So if you were to ask me that in an interview, I'd say, oh, great question. One of my favorite stories to tell, but can you be a little more specific on what you want to hear about? So I can go all the way back to grade school and all that if you want, but I'm assuming you want to hear about my work history. But is there a particular aspect of my background you're looking for? So I'd ask the employer, give me some guidance. I don't want to just ramble on and on about my background. I kind of have a crazy tech background in a lot of different areas, so I could keep you interviewing for an hour just to hear about myself. So I would ask them to give me a little more guidance or narrow the focus a little bit there.
Yep. And then what are your strengths and weaknesses? That usually comes up in interviews, and I know that's one of your favorites, Kurt. I hear you talk about it on the phone all the time.
Well, yeah, whenever I do an intake call with a new candidate, because I'm trying to get to know them, I want that perspective. What do you feel are your strengths? AKA, what are the things you have to offer a new employer? Why would they want to hire you? So it's good to think those things through ahead of time because it's a classic interview question, and your strengths need to be relevant to a work environment. And I tell folks it doesn't have to be all tech stack. It can be part of your personality, part of your approach, part of your style. But if you could only pick three things you're really good at, what would you choose for those? What would you want someone to know about you before they meet you? So you just want to think that through and jot it down. Now, if you've done your homework on the job posting, the best thing you can do is pick strengths you have that align to the role that's open, right? Because that's what they're trying to fill. So don't ramble on and on. Pick, your top three things. If you have a lot of other strengths, that's great. Be prepared to discuss them, but don't give them an entire wheelbarrow full of strengths, right? Pick your best ones that are relevant to the role you're interviewing on. The other one that's a big safety check there is your biggest weakness. I am philosophically opposed to the employers when they're interviewing not asking that. The reason being is they have an opening, they need work to get done. In theory, you have skills that can help them get that work done. Common sense and logic would say, let's focus on the alignment where I have skills that meet your needs. But it's a classic question, and some might say, well, those are great strengths. What's your biggest weakness? So my coaching on that would say, I don't really have a major weakness at work. I love what I do, and then talk about your strengths. But you still have to answer it, or you'll be viewed as being evasive or combative, and that doesn't, motivate anybody to move you forward. So just say, now that you mention it, I would love to get some that you truly would like to learn. Like if the boss said, hey, we've got some excess money in the training budget, as a reward, pick a seminar you'd like to go attend. Pick something like that you would genuinely like to add to your background and know why it would be valuable for you to get that. But it needs to be something that either through on-the-job experience or a training seminar would be easily obtainable and relevant to your work. So you might say, hey, I'm just getting into working with AI. I'd love to do more with that. Don't really view it as a weakness, but that's something I'd love to learn. So you answer the weakness question with something that's still useful for the job and your own career.
And that's great advice too. I always agree with the trying to align the strengths with the job description and so forth. One thing I would add about the weakness question, I love how Kurt answered it, and I'm going to tell others to do that as well. I love the wow, I don't really, that's great. I love it. The other side of it would be speak to a failure that doesn't sound like a huge failure and turn it around by saying, and here's how I solved for it. I was disappointed in how this worked out. It didn't go the way I had planned, but here's the repercussions. Here's how I learned from it. Here's how I did it better. Or, speaking to the skill set, I then went on my own steam and took a certification class, or, whatever it is. You can turn around, you can answer that question, but also show how you solved for it, because then that shows them that, we understand you're not going to be perfect at everything. You're going to fail at certain things. You're not going to be prepared for every situation that comes up. But how did you address that? How did you fix it? How did you remain positive about it? So that would be another way. And again, preparation is key for that. Think of some of those things ahead of time and how you answer it. But that would be another way to answer that question in a way that still benefits you for the role.
Yep. So it is right at noon. So anyone, if you have to leave, don't worry, we're going to post a recording to this webinar so you can catch the last part of it. But we do have, I think, at least one question on here that we haven't gotten to yet, and a couple of more slides that we're going to do real quick. And then we'll stay on for a few more minutes and take a few more questions. So how do you address negative circumstances with past employers? Either Michelle or Kurt, you want to take that one?
Yeah, we all have them. Again, we don't want to bring negativity to the interview itself. So the advice I have there, since it was a general topic, was, if something comes up that's relevant that you need to explain negative circumstances, the approach should be sort of what I call the suffering servant. You just say, hey, good company, I was enjoying my time there. It was just unfortunate that we had this situation come up with one of our biggest customers. And you just hit the facts. And, if it's something like my boss was super toxic, sexual harassment. It was all those other negative things. Bringing those up in an interview will not get you the next job. And they will, even though it's no fault of your own, they will throw negativity onto you. So I don't advise talking through them. Again, I would just say, well, it was uncomfortable. Leadership kept changing hands there, and a number of the staff members, myself, we just became uncomfortable with constantly changing priorities. So I felt it was, necessary for me to make a change. So anything negative, you really do not want to get yourself boxed into the corner where you're defending yourself, even though someone else who caused those circumstances. And the employer, the other person, is probably going to associate the negativity to you because you're the only frame of reference they have for that question. So that's one to just, again, no emotion, say it was unfortunate, you wished it had turned out differently, but I would not go into a ton of detail on negative circumstances. It's not a time for you to vent, to dump, or look for sympathy, because none of those will help you get the job.
Yep. And I think we pretty much answered those 4 questions on the right-hand side. We already covered those throughout the presentation. So, Michelle, I know you have some exciting news for Monster, so why don't you tell us about your
Yeah,
new
we
venture
have,
that's coming up?
yes. So we have some great tools on monster.com as well as on our mobile app. I put the QR code for the mobile app on there just for easy reference. But what I was really, thinking about when I was trying to think about what tools could I share with you, all of these questions that came in, we have a lot of them addressed on our website. And again, we'll provide an actual document referring to your specific questions after this webinar, but really use it as a tool, not just to post your job and find jobs, but we have so much more than that. We have a ton of this one article in particular, there's 100 job interview questions, and then we provide some recommended answers for it. We have this really new cool feature on our mobile app where if you are applying for a job, you then can do a mock interview. It's AI based, so it'll ask you interview questions and then you can answer them and figure out, kind of, it goes back to that preparation and practice. And things like, I think there were some questions that came in and how do I respond to an interview email and so forth. So there's some really cool things on our site. We have salary tools, we have resume help. So I hope that, you guys take a minute to take a look at that. And obviously Impact has a lot of those as well.
Perfect. And then for us here at Impact, we have a job board with open positions. And like we mentioned earlier, if you see a job on the job board, we are currently hiring for it. So it is live and active. We also have this webinar and some previous ones that we have posted recordings, so feel free to check those out. We have some podcasts, blog posts, and some other resources. We have a monthly newsletter too that we send out. There's one for each category of jobs, IT, finance, engineering, so on. So you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, and we'll send out some of the newest jobs that we have just added recently. And we have some more questions. So I thought we'd maybe take a few more questions before we call it a day. So I got a questions on the do your homework on the job posting. How do I break down the job description in preparations for an interview? So I can give a little insight. I love using like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and all that stuff. So what I would recommend, take the job description, drop it in, take your resume, drop it in, take the website link for the company, maybe drop it in and just ask, what are my things that I should prepare for before I go in for an interview, and they can tell you, here's some questions that they might ask for this type of job role, that kind of stuff. So use your AI tool. We'll have lots of insight. And then Kurt, maybe you can give some more insight on how to prepare for an interview and break down the job
Sure.
posting.
Well, it comes down to the quality of the job posting. And so you need to read beyond just the title, because titles vary widely for the exact same role at different firms that actually have different requirements to do that work. And
I
and
can
so
jump in. I'm going to
go
jump in
ahead.
on the job title real quick, and maybe Michelle, you can do a little side note on this too. Job titles are meant for the search engine of the job board. So it may not always be exactly the most detailed description of what the job actually is. The employer is strictly thinking, what's the job title I can put down that's going to get me the most eyeballs on this job? So just a little side note on that.
You
Right.
just gave an industry secret away, Mark. You're not supposed
Yeah,
to
I
say
guess so.
that.
Well, it creates a
Yeah, all the
challenge when
people
we're
that waited till the
putting our
end.
own postings up too, you know. We want to get to the right person. So, yeah, titles, yeah, it's the content of the job posting itself, if it's well written, that gives you the hints. Duties that actually are real duties, not generic. Parts of the tech stack, if you're a technology person, or processes and procedures for other disciplines. Those are the things to look for and see if there's enough detail to help you. But since the employers control that content, um, once you see a posting you're interested in, again, do your research, see if you know anybody there, see if you can identify who might manage that particular role, and see if you can reach out to them and let them know. Be direct. Say, hey, I'm looking for a new role. I have a background in this area. It looks like you may manage this at this firm. Would you mind giving me some coaching on what's the best way to interview with your employer? Because if it is the manager and their work isn't getting done, they're motivated to help you, even though you'll still have to go through the full interview cycle. But don't be shy about using the resources that are out on the web to find somebody who might actually be in the know on the specifics of that actual role, and just ask them for coaching. You know, could you give me some coaching or some advice? Most people would be happy to do that. And if you don't get any response, well, they may not be on that site very often, but that's the kind of homework you want to do, is really sift through the job posting itself and then see who you can network with to give you more insider scoop on how to best navigate that firm.
Yep. All right, so we have another question that is, I've been feeling stale and without interesting challenges for the last couple of years. So what do you do in that kind of situation?
I want me to jump in here. I think that we talked a little bit about career changes and reskilling. I think we have to take it upon ourselves to get ourselves out of that mode, right? So for me, I found taking some courses or even just doing some online certifications, it sort of motivates me in an area. And Kurt, I think you said this earlier, find something you're passionate about, find something that does spark your energy and go down that path and try to learn what that is about. Um, I think that's really, it's important to also recognize that work is work, right? So if you're feeling demotivated in some ways, there might be something personally in your life that you can um, explore, whether it's, another hobby or something else that brings you balance to your life so that you are motivated at work. Sometimes we just need a break from what we're doing. But my advice really is to just start learning new skills, start figuring out what it is you're passionate about, and add that to your current job description, add that to your current background, and so forth. And and if the reality is maybe you are burnt out from that career, so try to see how your skills can transfer to another role that might excite you more.
All right, so we
Yeah.
got a question from Hakeem. This is probably for you, Kurt. This will be right up your alley here. How do you navigate an entry-level IT job post that requires a few years of experience? I think if it requires a few years of
Mm,
experience, it's not really entry level directly, but what do you
right.
do when that happens, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big philosophical debate that's going on in the industry now of entry level is entry level. 2 to 3 years is not entry level. So the employer's got some challenges in terms of how they're presenting what they're trying to do. Nonetheless, you need to look at how your experiences, your skills align to what's posted, regardless of how they've classified it. And if you have those skills and experience, you apply for it. Um, True entry level means you're fresh out of a boot camp, a training session, or right out of college, or out, you don't have a lot of skills yet, but you're eager to learn in that space. So, um, I routinely get irritated by things that want a lot of experience, but they call it entry level. That's mislabeling, and it doesn't do anybody any service. But nonetheless, if they've classified it that way, the compensation may be lower as well. So you just have to do the best you can to say, here are relevant skills and experiences I've had that could transfer to that role. But it helps if you can, again, get to somebody who truly knows what are they doing with that role. because they do have it mislabeled. 2 to 3 years experience is not entry level.
All right, and then we have a question. I think Michelle, maybe you can respond to this one. How often do employers post jobs that they actually do not intend to fill?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think we mentioned earlier, there are some requirements sometimes that organizations have that even if they have an internal candidate, they really need to post it and interview other people and make sure they're vetting other people before just handing that role over to someone internally. Percentage wise, I don't know that I'd answer that question accurately. It does happen. That's just one example of why. The other side is I think we talked about leadership changing and priorities changing, and the interview process and the job posting process can take a long time. Whether in a larger corporation, the hiring manager wants to fill a certain role, but then has to go to the leadership to say, can I have this role? And then leadership has to run it by finance or legal to make so these things can take time, and sometimes priorities change at that point. So they may have a job posted. That's not necessarily either exactly what they need anymore, which we were talking about the job descriptions kind of changing, or the role's not they're not really looking for an outside person to fill that role. So I apologize, I can't really give you a majority versus I can't give you a percentage there, but you just have to keep trying to apply to roles and doing the best you can. I think Kurt, you said this earlier. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask pointed questions like, are there any internal candidates applying for this role? Who are the other types of candidates that you're interviewing with? Those kind of questions. I think it's scary sometimes, but I think it's okay to ask pointed questions as long as you're doing it in a very positive way and you're trying to learn and you're trying to then say, well, here's how I can address that and so forth. And just to be knowledgeable, you're also interviewing them, right? At the end of the day, we're also interviewing them. So
I think it signals to the employer that you're actually interested because you're asking some tough questions.
exactly.
So I don't know if we have any other questions in the chat that we didn't get to, so we'll give it a few more moments here. If you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat.
I also just wanted to add, and Kurt, I'm saying this, but I know you and I spoke about this earlier. Our emails are on here. I know there's probably some questions either that are difficult to ask in a public, in this kind of forum, or you think about after. Feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're happy to answer questions and do the best we can to answer those questions or lead you to someone else that may be able to.
Yep, and we will go through all of the questions that were asked during the sign-up process, because I know there were some more that we just didn't have time to get to. So we'll put together a PDF and we'll try to respond to all of those and send those out so you get those answered as well. But I don't see any other questions, so I'd just like to thank Michelle and Kurt. Oh, wait, I got a question. How would I,
Spoke too
right at the
soon.
last second. I got two questions. How would I align my technical resume to a conceptual job description?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. When you say conceptual job description, is it just a poorly written job posting? I mean, what we need in the job posting is valid, accurate details on what's required for the role, and then you need valid, accurate experiences you've had that align to it. So if something is so generic you can't figure out what it is, I would view that as a waste of your time to even try.
Yep.
Many employers, they think by running like their job posting through ChatGPT, it'll add a lot of flowery verbiage that really says absolutely nothing. And so that's a danger in running your resume through ChatGPT, is it'll make a lot of stuff sound important that really at the end of the day says nothing. So if you're going to use those tools, you should use them as a starting point to kind of give you a good template, but then you need to tweak the actual wording used so that it's accurate and it actually follows a method of, here's what I was asked to work on, here's the tools I used to accomplish it, and here was the business result that was created from it. That's the most important thing to a hiring manager or to an employer, is being able to easily understand what were you asked to work on, how did you do it, and what were the tools involved to get there, and what was the business benefit of you doing it. So Something that's real conceptual, I would just ignore it. I mean, we see that all the time ourselves, where the job posting is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I tend to
So
post a lot of things to LinkedIn where I make fun of those things. And then at the end, I give some practical
we
suggestions for process improvement. So,
we got a little clarification here on the question, Kurt. So it says the
yeah,
job description doesn't, yeah, the job description does not really mention true technical skills, yet the title is technical.
yeah. Uh, Again, I'm not sure how you can address that other than if you have skills and experiences that map to that kind of title, go ahead and point those out. Just if this title is a good title for a role, then you just point out where your experience is aligned to that title itself. If the job posting
Yeah.
itself is too generic or too, like
So
they
I
said,
would,
conceptual.
yeah, I would say then maybe go look at similar job postings and see if somebody else has posted a similar job title, but maybe they have a more detailed description, just so you can
Right.
see what kind of things might be expected. So maybe get some idea that way. And then we got a question, are cover letters still useful?
I
So
am not a I'm not a
yeah,
personal fan of cover letters because employers themselves look at things like your resume, your transcripts, your certification certificates. Those are all like credentials. And so what I routinely recommend is if you want something like a cover letter and you don't want it just ignored, you might want to just include a summary paragraph at the beginning of your resume that speaks to the role like a cover letter might, because your resume is going to go through the different steps and processes no matter what. But it's a mixed bag of recruiters who just toss cover letters and those who actually value them. So I usually recommend let's just keep everything in your resume. And at the very beginning, you have a summary about yourself, and you can include some of the content you would have put in a cover letter, just stating how your background maps to that position. First thing a recruiter is going to do is look at your resume. They're going to keyword search it because they're getting overloaded with the number of people who are applying. So usually a summary section at the beginning is a better place to put those kind of details than a long-winded, impassioned cover letter that may or may not get read and may get lost as part of your credentials moving through the system.
Unless
I
maybe they
a
ask for
hundred.
one.
Yeah, I was just going to say 100% what Kurt said. You'll also notice on a lot of job postings now, there's easy apply where they just ask for your resume. And I think that speaks to the fact that a lot of organizations use what's called an ATS or applicant tracking system. And that wants your resume, right? It wants your resume to scan relevant terms and to really see what your experience ties to the job description. And along the lines of what Kurt said, really, if you can put that on your resume in the summary, then that gives them exactly what they need. I mean, you can imagine if we're feeling as candidates that we're competing with so many people, imagine how the recruiter that has to go through all of that, to really get to the core people who would be interviewed. So the cover letters do tend to get tossed or not even looked at. So you'll see a lot of easy apply online where you just focus on your resume. And as Mark was just saying, and I rudely interrupted, um, if an employer wants a cover letter, 9 times out of 10, it's going to say, send your cover letter and resume. So
And if you have a great resume and the employer sees it, but there's no cover letter, they're not going to just toss it to the side. They're going to be like, hey, could you send us a cover letter if that's missing? So they're not going to pass up a great candidate just because the cover letter wasn't there. But,
True.
we got one more question from Delwyn. If you have years of experience, how long should your resume be?
Well, in what I do as an agency, I don't have the same limitations that some people see plastered all over the web. My rule is basically the more experience you have, the longer your resume should be. Once you get past, 5 or 10 years of experience, use your own judgment in terms of is some of the tech and the things I did back then as relevant today as it was back then, because then you can start summarizing after that. But the most current things that you have should be expounded on so that a new employer, someone who doesn't know you, really does have a good handle on what you can do. But never use a one-page resume. You know, the more years of experience you have, the more pages you're allowed to have. Let's not create a whole novella there, but you know, 3 to 5 page resume for a really experienced person, as long as the content is relevant, like to the role and to your career, that is okay. You know, nobody should complain about that. It'll give them a deeper feel for all of your experiences. You just don't want to drone on and on. Again, use a bullet point mentality at each employer of here's what I worked on, here's what I used to do it, and here was the business benefit. Bullet point mentality there, make it easy for them to see the relevance of your skills and experiences.
Yep. And I'll add to that a
Exactly.
little bit.
Oh, go
Yes,
ahead.
can I add
Sorry,
to that a
Mark.
little bit? Something that I see on resumes that I look at them when they come in is a lot of people don't customize their resume to the role. So we'll get a resume that has absolutely nothing to do with the job they applied to. So if you have a long resume, customize it a little bit to more specifically cover just the parts that are in the job description. So if you have some
Sure.
stuff that you did that doesn't relate at all, just take it out and to shorten down the resume.
Yeah.
So there are
I would
no
say,
other
uh,
questions.
I just wanted to add to that a little bit. I like what you just said, Mark. And sometimes what I recommend is doing that great big long resume, but then picking and choosing which pieces go onto an actual, specific resume. And as far as from my point of view, from Monster's point of view, if you wanted to do a generalization, I would say if you have lots of experience, we typically say, 2 or 3 pages as well. But I will say it does speak to the job itself, right? And again, bringing the marketing example into it, you don't need 3 pages. You need to pick and choose, just like when Kurt talked about going into an interview and saying what your strengths are. Try to pick the top, 3 to 5 that relate to that job description, and make sure you're putting those up front. Make sure you're putting those, at the front end of the resume, as well as going through the job description, and again, not worrying so much about the number of pages. And the last thing I would say about that is it's really it can be really hard to be succinct when you're first writing something, or even the third draft, but try to step back and see where you can combine things, even from a visual standpoint. As Kurt just mentioned, think of it as a bulleted standpoint, think of it as formulaic. Here's what I did, here's I'm sorry, I'm skipping, doing out of order, Kurt, what you said, but yours was much
That's
better.
all right.
With ending with the business result and the business benefit, try to think of it in that formulaic approach, so you can really just call down what you're saying on your resume to those important scannable points that bring you to the top of the pile.
Yep. I don't see any other questions. So with that, Kurt, Michelle, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for
Thank you, Mark.
joining. And yep, we'll
Thank you,
have some
Mark.
follow-up.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yep. We'll have some
Thanks,
follow-up
Michelle.
that we'll send out. And if you have any questions, just send an email to Kurt and Michelle directly as well, and they'll be happy to